Greetings, everybody. I'm Pastor Joshua Sullivan at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Kerrville, Texas. Welcome back to another episode of ATP, Ask the Pastor. Before we get to today's question, if you haven't done so already, make sure and subscribe to the channel. Click that notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. And check out the links that we have in the video description below, including our link to a searchable database of over 500 questions that ATP has answered already. And of course, if your question hasn't been asked, then email me, atpholycross@gmail.com, and I will get to your question as soon as I'm able. All right, today's question. Dear Pastor, what does the Easter Bunny have to do with the holiday? Fantastic question. So the Easter Bunny is a German immigrant. He came to America in the late 17th, early 18th centuries. When Germans immigrated to the New World and made their home in Pennsylvania, they brought with them the tradition of the Easter hare. Now, that tradition is first described in 1682 by a German physician, Georg Frank von Frankenau, and he briefly describes how the Easter hare lays eggs in the grass and on bushes on Easter Eve so that on Easter Day, children can search them out, find them, eat way too many of them, and this is bad for their health. So it was the Deutsch that brought this tradition to America, where it took root on American soil and grew into what we know today as the Easter Bunny. But what does the Easter Bunny or the Easter hare have to do with Easter, with Christ's resurrection? Well, scripturally, nothing. If anything, the association between the hare and Christ's resurrection seems to be a confluence of natural and ecclesiastical circumstances of spring. So as hares come out of their burrows and reproduce in the spring, Christ also rose from the dead to new life in spring. This seems to be the reason why the rabbit or the hare was adopted as a Christian symbol in the late medieval and early Renaissance periods. Several churches across Western Europe and England are adorned with images of three hares arranged in a circle so that their ears form a triangle, which signifies the Trinity. Probably the most well-known of those resides at the cathedral in Paderborn, Germany. German artist Albrecht Dürer produced a woodcut in 1496 entitled The Holy Family with Three Hares, in which there are three hares at Mary's feet, two of them together, one of them heading off towards a hole in the ground that has a stone nearby, which I assume symbolizes the burial and resurrection of Christ. And in other artwork from the period, white rabbits sometimes appear in paintings of the Virgin Mary, symbolizing Mary's purity, her fertility, or both. Now, since the rise of rationalism, however, the common explanation between the relationship between the hare and Christ's resurrection is that it is a remnant of paganism that has survived within Christianity. Now, it's assumed that the hare was a companion of the Anglo-Saxon goddess Eostre, which symbolized fertility. Now, I say assumed because this explanation comes from the 19th century conjecture that's based on one single historical source. The Northumbrian scholar and monk, the Venerable Bede, he died in 735 AD. Bede mentions a pagan goddess by the name of Eostre once in his work, The Reckoning of Time. So while he's describing the months of the English people, he writes this: Ostermannoth has the name which is now translated Paschal month, and which was once called after a goddess of theirs named Eostre, in whose honor feasts were held in that month. Now they designate the Paschal season by her name, calling the joys of the new rite by the time-honored name of the old observance. This is the only historical reference we have to any Anglo-Saxon goddess by the name of Eostre. All Bede tells us is that Eostre was worshipped in England before his time, and that they call the Paschal season by her name, since it typically falls in April. Now, it should be noted that this reference in Bede is controversial. Many scholars think that Bede invented Eostre, or at the very least, exaggerated her existence. Now, from this scant reference, European folklorist Jacob Grimm suggested in 1835 that Eostre must have been an Anglo-Saxon version of a German goddess by the name of Eostre. Now, here's the important thing about Grimm's proposal. There's no evidence that there was ever a German goddess by that name. Now, later then, in 1874, another folklorist by the name of Adolf Holtzmann connects the tradition of the Easter hare with Grimm's conjecture of Eostre. Holtzmann writes, "The Easter hare is inexplicable to me, but probably the hare was the sacred animal of Eostre, just as there is a hare on the statue of the Celtic goddess Abnoba." Now, the next few decades after Holtzmann saw that conjecture take on a whole life of its own. So in some versions, the hare was originally a bird that pulled the goddess Eostre's chariot, but the goddess turns the bird into a hare, but it retained its ability to lay eggs, and so it does that every Easter day. So what we have in this is a made-up connection between an already existing German folk tradition and a probably fictional pagan goddess. Even scholars who accept Eostre as a historical Anglo-Saxon deity deny any link between the goddess and hares. Now, others took this conjecture to an entirely different level by suggesting that Easter is named for the ancient Near Eastern goddesses Ishtar or Ashtoreth. The reason? The name sounds similar. Now, even though they're from entirely different parts of the world, entirely different cultures, and entirely unrelated languages. Now, in my opinion, this is worse than the claim that Jesus is derived from Ea Zeus. At least in that claim, both names are from the same language, although still unrelated. So any resemblance between Easter and any ancient Near Eastern pagan goddesses, purely coincidental. Now, since its first historical mention in 1682, that Easter hare has brought eggs to children. And the reason between eggs and Easter can also be explained by that confluence of natural and ecclesiastical circumstances in spring. Ecclesiastically, eggs were not eaten during the Lenten fast. When the Lenten fast ends, eggs can be eaten once again. And naturally, eggs are a symbol of new life. Now, these two associations more than likely led to the egg symbolizing Christ's resurrection. So just as a chick comes forth from its egg, so Christ came forth from the tomb to new life on the third day, and we can eat eggs again on that day. Now, I've read in places online that Augustine was the first to describe Christ's resurrection from the dead as a chick bursting forth from the egg, but I have yet to find that reference in any of Augustine's works. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, eggs are dyed red. Now, this comes from the tradition that Mary Magdalene was a Roman citizen of patrician rank who gained an audience with Caesar after the resurrection of Christ. And when Mary told Caesar that Christ is risen, he replied that Jesus had no more risen from the dead than that egg in her hand was red. And so when she showed him the egg, it was red. Now, in the Gospel of Nicodemus, one of its recensions, Mary resolves to go to Caesar to complain about Pilate's lawlessness, but in that account there's no account of a red egg, to the best of my knowledge. So this unwritten tradition then is the reason why you will sometimes see icons of Mary Magdalene with a red egg. So eggs in the Eastern Church and hares that deliver eggs in parts of the Western Church, these aren't testaments then to a remnant of paganism that survived within Christianity, but the fact that hares and eggs are naturally associated with spring and new life. And that association led the church in her art, in her architecture, to loosely associate the hare and the egg with Christ, who rose from the dead in spring to new life. Since the association between hares and eggs, then, with spring and new life is natural rather than scriptural, cultural Easter customs are often, as we all are familiar with, decoupled from Christianity and practiced as their own cultural things apart from Christianity. And this is why unbelievers still have Easter egg hunts and things like that. This doesn't mean that Christian families then should forego the Easter bunny and Easter egg hunts. It only means then that they need to be done as a cultural tradition that can reinforce the article of faith that Christ rose from the dead to new life, so that all who persevere in faith and into the end will also rise to new life on the last day. So that is the Easter Bunny. We'll see you next time for another episode of ATP Ask the Pastor.